everyone. We are live, in case you're in the room and didn't know. Welcome to our event that will be all about AI, the narratives of AI in our community, creativity, and first up, we'll be talking all about AI and music. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge not just what we're here to talk about, but where we are by acknowledging that we are here in Mianjin, otherwise known as Brisbane. We're on the land of the Turrbal and Yugara people, so I'd like to pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and also acknowledge that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people are our first scientists and first technologists of this land and the many nations that make up this land we now call Australia. So I would like to let you know that we will have a performance first up before we get into our panel discussion. And there are some of you in the room here. There are also others you can't see who are watching on our live stream. So hello to you if you are watching on the live stream around the world, on the World Wide Web. I don't know if everyone's heard of it, but it's very exciting. So first up, I just want to introduce Uncanny Valley. We have two of the members here today, Justin and Charlton. And Uncanny Valley are famous for winning the first AI song contest, the AI version of Eurovision. So welcome to the stage, Uncanny Valley.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you. And thanks everyone for being here. So, here we are. Quite honoured today to be speaking at the World Science Festival. We're going to start by just unpacking a little bit about ourselves. Firstly, what is the Uncanny Valley? Well, Justin, do you want to explain that graph? Because it's just a nice start. It is our namesake, and it begins
Hi everyone.
with that graph.
Uncanny Valley, yes, it's that creepy feeling you get. It's kind of hard to describe, but if you see something that's almost but not quite human, that's sort of meant to be human, then you're going to experience this feeling called the Uncanny Valley. It's a kind of disgust and almost a kind of, you draw back and go, why? What's wrong with that thing? Why doesn't it look exactly like a human? That's the Uncanny Valley.
So it sounds like a negative thing to call your company, but we believe it's the most important thing to surpass in our time, particularly in the arts and using technology in creativity. So a brief history of who we are. I'm co-founder and head of music and innovation at Uncanny Valley. My history has always been around human emotion. I grew up as an actor in my teens, as a songwriter and recording artist in my 20s, and then throw in an economics degree. And here I am working with new technology to ensure that artists retain revenue streams and have new creative ways to work in the arts. And this is my colleague, Justin Shave.
I'm Justin Shave. I'm the music producer and sonic technologist at Uncanny Valley. All my life, I've been obsessed with getting the sounds that I hear inside my head out of some speakers. That led to me to be a musician firstly, a piano player, then moving into work with synthesizers, keyboards, sound generation devices, and then being musical director for live bands and such. But we founded Uncanny Valley together in 2010.
We did.
Charlton?
This began with somewhat traditional pursuits, you could argue, in terms of original music creation, music production, remixes. Justin's a dance music producer as well as a classically trained pianist. And so, you know, working for advertising agencies, film companies, production companies, what that translates as is thousands of briefs from creative people who are using words and music to talk about music, when really what we discovered over a long period of time, I guess, was that we were really interested in how they want to feel. And so the question is that can you teach computers to feel? And the answer is, well, not really yet, but you can teach them to understand music. And of course, music evokes feeling. So really, we like to think that we are raging with the machines, and that's become the pursuit of our company. So much so that we place a musical lens on technology. It's something we say. And we're very excited to have been having conversations and collaborations with academics, Griffith University, University of New South Wales, as well as pursuing an Australian Research Council grant at the moment for our efforts in the field. So Justin.
Yeah, so what we're most interested in at this point is artificial intelligence, of course, as we all are, and where it can take us in terms of music. This is an interesting thing we like to refer to. When will we be able to produce a song indistinguishable from a real artist making that song? And also, when we'll be able to generate a top 40 pop song? Current estimates say 2027, but we saw a news article last week. You guys might have seen this. It is an actual recreation of a version of Eminem's "My Name Is," which is created by an AI bot, and it's actually quite convincing if you have a listen to it. So get online and have a listen to it.
So it's interesting to see that artists are already dabbling with these sort of techniques, and we need to state that, you know, as we have this conversation today, this is about pursuing augmented creativity and interesting ways to create music rather than sort of press the buttons and send all the artists home. So, the Eurovision AI Song Contest, Lee mentioned it. It was a big moment for us last year during COVID. It was quite a nice, shiny thing to have happen. We thought we were sort of the Labrador at the end of the news because it was sort of all this sort of Trump and COVID and things, and we won the AI Song Contest. I'm just going to play it and have a little listen, see how you feel, and then we're going to unpack a little bit as to how that all came about. Should be hearing it now, I think.
Flying fear, but love keeps on coming. Flying, flying. Dreams to live on the wings of happiness. Dreams still, dreams still. Flying from this world that has gone apart. Flying, open up the heart, I ain't scared no more. Welcome home, welcome home, welcome home. The world is beautiful, the world. Welcome home, welcome home, welcome home.
I might stop it there. You can play that to your heart's content after the show. So look, it was a great moment for us, and you know, there was a lot of attention around the win. Admittedly, Eurovision itself didn't happen because of COVID, so there was more attention perhaps than there would have been. But look, we actually have to thank today, obviously, the Goethe-Institut and the Queensland AI Hub, but particularly the Goethe-Institut for having us here today, because we actually pipped the German entry, which was coming first with the jury vote until the popular vote came through. So thank you for being such
Good losers.
Good losers is the way to put it. So there's the award. As I said, a lot of hype around the world. We had a lot of fun that week, sort of talking to you know, news entities around the world, and this is the team that worked on it. So myself and Justin, you know, our colleague Caroline Pegram, who is a strategist in innovation. Who would think Antigone, a human singer who's actually being represented by quite a digital-looking image there. But then, Justin, who else have we got
In
here?
the bottom, we have the people who aren't necessarily musicians. We have Dr. Sandra from RMIT. We have Dr. Brendan, who is our data scientist. Sally Ann Williams from Cicada Innovations, and Dr. Oliver Bowen, who's a creative computationalist at New South Wales University. So, yeah, a varied number of different skill sets.
Absolutely,
here,
and we'll unpack that a little.
Yeah.
What's interesting is who wrote the winning song. And in fact, go further, who owns the copyright in the song? I think I need a whole nother speech to take you down sort of a legal pathway that's evolving around the ownership of songs. What we can tell you is that the whole team owns the song. So when we came to register the song with the traditional pathways of APRA, which is the Australian Performing Rights Association, everyone was credited for their work, because we found it very difficult to find who was being creative in a traditional sense and who was being creative in a very new way. So I guess the analogue is that, you know, these days songs are being written by many people. Often 10 people will be credited for writing a Katy Perry song. You say, well, how did that come about? And I guess we're seeing an evolution where people who have contributed in some way are being credited as a writer, not in a traditional sense. So how did we do it, Justin?
You might have a bunch of questions about how we did this. Quite obviously, we used artificial intelligence. We used artificial intelligence techniques. I mean, obviously, it was the AI song contest, so we had to. But I find that using artificial intelligence in a creative sense is a great way to spark creativity, to give ideas, to make interesting things that make you want to take them further. And that's the way we used artificial intelligence in making that song. That's how we did it. Why did we do it? I love happy accidents. I'm a music producer in the studio. I love things occurring that surprise me, and because I think that sort of spurs you on just to be a little bit more creative when you do that. You wonder where does inspiration come from? Well, if you can automate that process of where inspiration comes from, then you've kind of got something good going on, I think, anyway.
I guess that's what we've been investigating by using these AI processes. So we all had the same data set when we started the competition. So Justin, what was that data set? Was Conchita involved, or where did it all come from?
Well, when we say data set, we're talking about the way in which we taught the machines about Eurovision. I mean, if we were going to write this song traditionally as songwriters, then we would sit down and possibly listen to every winning Eurovision song and then work out the essence of Eurovision. How does Eurovision work? Why do people feel the way they do when they listen to Eurovision songs? And ultimately, what makes a Eurovision song the best Eurovision song? What's going to win it for us? So instead of doing that manually, as humans, we tried doing that with machines, using machine learning. And the currency of machine learning are things called neural nets, which are sort of software models of the brain, where you can use it to extract patterns from bits of data and then spit out new data that relates to the data that you put into it. So when we talk about data, we're going, what data we put in? We put in all the Eurovision songs, quite simply. We put in the musical symbolic information, which is the chords, the melodies, in some cases, the little hooks that you hear, little earworms that you hear. And we ran them through one neural net to gain some musical ideas, and then we did lyrics after that. The lyrics we put through another neural net. We're kind of using as many neural nets as we could think of using, because in a sense, that's sort of how I can figure out the brain is working when we're putting music together. There's several different parts of your brain working together to create one product. I think that's the way I like to imagine it anyway. So yes, these are the lyrics that were generated with another neural net called GPT-2, which a kind of special neural net which takes context around words. So all the Eurovision lyrics went into the net and it came up with stuff like this, which was a bit bonkers.
So what was really interesting as that third process is the matching of lyrics and melody, which in a traditional sense, as a human, I mean, we do that all the time. You might write the words first, you might come up with the melody first. Every artist is different, but then integrating the lyrics with the melody and finding, are you juxtaposing a sad lyric with an upbeat melody? Is it complementing it? Lots of decisions, creative decisions that are happening along the way. So these are the words. So, flying in fear, but love keeps on coming. Flying, flying. Dream still lives on the wings of happiness. Dream still.
We automated the process by which we matched the lyrics with the melody. Sandra wrote that software from RMIT. And it simply took the number of syllables that were in the lyrics and looked through the whole list of melodies that the computer had spat out and matched what they did. And then we synthesized those vocals with another product called Synzi. And this is the result. That's a high one.
We took liberties to change octaves of the outputs.
We thought we could change some octaves, There's some things we had to curate to make it work, but ultimately the melodies that came out and the lyrics, we held true to the song.
So what you're hearing is what was one of the first and significant outputs of that interaction of
Here's
melody
the chorus,
and lyric.
yeah.
So having heard the song before, this is what we heard first before we then began to produce it. Quite eerie, but beautiful.
But kind of cute too.
Cute?
Kind of cute, right?
In a scary Skynet kind of way. Okay. So, because it wouldn't be the Eurovision Song Contest without something culturally avant-garde, you know, we had to bring out something that was of interest. And to our colleagues' credit, Caroline Pegram was adamant that we had to express a world event that had been recognised about Australia, which was the fires and the trauma obviously caused not only humans but to animals. So the koala synth was born. And so how did we do that using DDSP?
Not content with only using music symbolic information, I wanted to actually have an AI generate some actual waveforms. So we used a then novel technique called DDSP, which takes the sound of one thing and translates it into the sound of another using artificial intelligence and machine learning. So we ended up feeding sounds of koalas, Tasmanian devils, what other animals? Kookaburras, that's right, into the neural net and see what came out the other side, and thus the koala synth was born.
It sounds like this on its own.
Yeah.
Not all that impressive on its own.
Not all that impressive. But when we put it into the song, it was great.
However, insert music producer Justin Shave.
Yeah.
And sorry, I might have done that. Can I hit play again? Sorry. And it's certainly time for some humans. So Justin took all these ideas. As a songwriter, I assisted by helping curate the longer-term story arc over the song. And I think we felt after the win that we had struck a chord with not only our valid use of AI techniques, but then speaking to augmented creativity, we then took it upon ourselves to harness all of those great ideas and happy accidents and turn it into something that was tangible, and to my point earlier, that people felt. And so when we won the public vote, I guess it was validating to know that people actually felt something about it, and there was a message that we had translated at that time, being in the midst of COVID, as I guess the rest of the world still is. So how can artists harness the power of augmented creativity? I guess you've seen it in sort of an example where we had a specific objective and data set and had fun with that. We have been working with Google's Creative Lab in Sydney on a project which is ML tools, machine learning tools for musicians. And these are very much prototypes, just moving around the idea of what tools might feel like or look like or what they would actually achieve. I'm going to run this video just to explain it, but the two tools we came up with was something called Adlibber, which was a chance to work with ML and lyric writing, and the other is Demo Memo, which is using the same koala synth DDSP process to take humming or whistling or whatever you want to do into your phone to translate that into an instrument. So check it out.
Suggestion to recreate the sound. It took me 40 years. That's a diss. Okay, shots fired.
Hey Google, relax with the sass about 40%.
Uncanny Valley has partnered with Google's Creative Lab to investigate how music and songwriting can be aided by technology at this time.
Demo Memo, basically you can sing into it and turn that audio file into different instruments.
Adlibber, you can put lyrics into the app and it'll spit back possible avenues for you to travel. It'll put me somewhere to play.
I'm seeing a new generation of Australian artists using new tools with their own experiences and creating a unique voice.
If you can put this into a kid's hand that didn't see themselves as artists, that's where you're going to see the change in the game.
So super exciting and super tangible to work with the three artists in question to see how each of them use those processes differently, and they certainly did that. You can get to those links, yes. So what if we keep teaching computers more and more about music and actually go further and say how to produce it? Justin, do you want to talk a little bit about MIMU, which is I guess a flagship software product that we've been working on, and it encapsulates everything, I guess, that is the architecture behind what you believe is a new and interesting way to interact with music.
It does. It tries to incorporate all the AI techniques we've been talking about today, and its basic output is a continuous stream of produced music, which it uses various different techniques. It takes portions of sound which are intelligent. When it teaches them how to understand how they can combine with other bits of sound, and the end result is a piece of music that always sounds musical, I guess you could say. So it's sort of like a meta production tool. It takes the step that we haven't quite achieved yet with the Eurovision Song Contest in producing it by humans, and projects that into a system which might be able to, in effect, produce music itself. So,
and once again, I mean, this is not to replace anything to do with the artistry of the music creation. In fact, it's more, in our eyes, a democratization of that part of the process to allow young emerging artists to engage in a way with high-level production values and collaboration, and maybe even break the mold that a music doesn't have to be a 3 or 4 minute track as it was designed for in the 1950s for radio. It could now be a much broader expression of an artist's body of work, both historical work or new work. So this is, I'm just going to jump into playing some of it now. This is
something that came out this morning.
MIMU plays 24/7, so you know, effectively that's 10,080 minutes a week. It's generating it faster than playback speed, so it's 33,600 minutes of music a week, and this is real-time, cloud-based mixing of a huge array of artistic contributions from beat makers, vocalists. You know, it can take sound from anywhere really, but the idea is that it's helping to create a collaborative engine.
Our next step is to make it more interactive, so a very simple interface whereby you'd be able to speed the music up, slow the music down, make the music happier, make the music sadder. It all should happen in real time. So that's kind of what we're working on at the moment. Just wanted to give you a sneak peek.
Yeah, and the idea is that what if every artist had a MIMU channel? They don't just release a single. They put it out as a 24/7 channel that's actually morphing with the time of day, location, all sorts of variables. And then what if everyone had a MIMU music channel? What if people just want to emote in the same way that they use Instagram or Vision through music? So, hey, listen to my MIMU channel. My friend from over the other side of the world sends me a link, and they start to talk to me and explain, you know, how they're feeling through music. It's not such a crazy idea. And if that was the case, then I guess we all would really be raging with the machine. So I thought I'd bring it back to that as we wrap up today. Thanks for having us. We're looking forward to the panel now with Andrew Brown. But we're Uncanny Valley, and there's a little bit more of the song to go out on. Thank you.
Our third panellist who you haven't met yet, let me just take a seat. Professor Andrew Brown is sitting here to my left. He is someone who's not unfamiliar with an algo rave, and I will get him to explain what that is. He's also interested in computational aesthetics, in music and technology, in the academic side as well as the practical side, in dancing and dissertations. So please welcome again Andrew Brown.
Thank you very much. Yes, I like that. Dancing and dissertations, it's nice. I might put that on my website. So yes, I've been interested in algorithmic music for a long time, and it's great to see how far it's come, and the sorts of work that Uncanny Valley and others and their partners are doing is just fantastic work. But what I really like about the presentation we've just heard is this notion that the focus has been on how we work together with that technology. And I think in my history with working with technologies and algorithmic processes, that's always been the central kind of question, is how do you work with those technologies to make the most interesting music and invent new ways of making music. But to your question, what is an algo rave? Since about 2005, I've been doing a practice with a few others around the world called live coding. In live coding, you get on stage with a blank text editor and you write the software that produces the music as a performance. And so that's called live coding. An algo rave is the use of that kind of live coding process in a kind of rave party context. So in a nightclub, doing EDM music styles, because for algorithmic music can be done in any style, as we've just seen. So algo raves are particularly about doing that in real time in a nightclub setting, which kind of sounds kind of crazy, and perhaps it is, but that's what it's all about.
And algo standing for algorithm, and how would you explain an algorithm to anyone who might be watching and thinking, what's that?
Yeah, so an algorithm is just like a recipe or a process for doing something. So you could call, making a cake an algorithm. It could be an algorithm for making a cake. We call it a recipe, this process. And so an algorithm for generating a particular musical phrase or a particular musical rhythm would be a description of a process which will result in that phrase or that rhythm. And I think the important thing about artificial intelligence is, in a sense, it's just the latest in a series of algorithmic processes that we've had. And so that's why it's sort of is a trend, and it's sort of moving us forward. Part of the magic of that is that some of those processes are really very powerful, and so we're able to achieve things we may not have done before.
Now, I wanted to bring you back to what we've just seen and heard and boogied to from Uncanny Valley. When you were watching that, what sort of themes did you see from your work come out in that sort of performance? And I also wanted to ask if you have any questions for our AI performers from your perspective and your work.
I think the most interesting thing for me is what are the basis of the algorithms that are involved, and we could get into more details there, but it's a bit nerdy. I think the thing which is interesting though is to see the focus on how computational processes, in this case artificial intelligence processes, were merged with musical competencies of the artists, and it's really that combination which gets us there, and I think that's where the future is going to be really, really bright. I think if people think that an AI is going to somehow do this thing magically all by itself, and some computer scientist without reference to any artist is going to be able to make that happen, it's very unlikely. What's much more likely is that the people like Uncanny Valley, who are musicians by trade, are going to take those tools and run with them in sensible ways.
Yeah, so Justin and Charlton, do you get that question a lot when you're talking to musicians about what you do, where they're like, oh, well, if you're just training computers, aren't you just replacing musicians and their unique creativity?
We soon found out that was a very bad viewpoint to have when we're talking about this sort of stuff. Look, it's always been about how we can augment the creativity of musicians, and some people are very open to it. We want to work with this new technology. It's amazing. Some musicians are more I'm not so sure about this. I just want to, but I think the kind of systems that we're working on and talking about using can be used by all musicians to make something new and creative. I think we need to limit ourselves with new processes of creating music. I mean, technology has, it's progressed. Every time there's a new technological revolution, we started with tape machines, and we moved to DAWs, digital music after that, and then finally we found a place where artificial intelligence is starting to take a main stage in musical creation. So it's exciting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think the reason that you've heard from Queensland AI Hub and the Goethe-Institut is, despite obviously beating Germany, you can see the potential for that collaboration. Does it feel like more of a collaboration to you, like working with another artist almost, working with some code?
I think initially it feels that way because it's exciting and it's new, but as things evolve, we've been enjoying when the technology starts to creep back under the hood and you stop thinking about it, in the same way that when Pro Tools and those sorts of editing programs came out, I'm going to go sort of early 90s, you could hear the sort of music that people were creating, and it wasn't necessarily good. If you listen back to some of those mixes, incredibly sibilant and highly quantized and edited, and I think people got over that and finally got back to the job of just being human and creative again. So I think with the advent of any technology, it's a shiny thing. But then, look, let's say in a couple of years' time, or however long it takes, we'll be looking back on this moment and actually feeling the same way as we do about the advent of the synthesizer and the kind of analog to digital sort of revolution that occurred. It happened. We moved on. Artists remain artists. Humans become more creative and human. And life goes on. Well,
I personally think that the koala synth will be timeless. But that's just my...
We have patented... No, we haven't.
We'll have to release it as a plug-in.
So I'm sure that you all have burning questions. So feel free, again, to ask those on our app. And I think we can get the details of how to do that up on the screen. I wanted to ask as well about what some of the different issues are, Andrew, you might want to begin, that you're tackling in your work. Why, for instance, people think about Griffith University, they think about these institutions. Why is digital art so important to be in those spaces?
Well, as an academic, we're always trying to be on the leading edge of the ideas of things that are happening. And so my work at both the Queensland Conservatorium and the Queensland College of Art at Griffith is just trying to push myself and our colleagues to embrace these kinds of activities and to really always push new boundaries. One of the things to think about is that techniques like artificial intelligence are kind of considered by artists like media. Like you paint on paper, you paint on canvas, you paint on bark, all of those different media have a different outcome for what happens. And in the same way as these guys have described, if you use analog tape machines, or you use digital production tools, or you use artificial intelligence algorithms, these are going to have different influences over the music that you make and over the art that you make. And so we're really interested from an academic perspective to understand what those differences are and how those things can be incorporated and what the new horizons for creative activities can be given in new media.
So when we think about these tools and how you can use them, in what way do you think that might actually open up more creativity that was untapped before because of the way that people were making music?
Well, for me, I can go back to the example that you raised from my practice of algorithmic live coding. Like, live coding wasn't a thing before there was a computer and a live coding platform. It wasn't a musical practice that existed prior to that. And every time there are new technologies, new musical practices, new creative practices will emerge. In the same way as when samplers came in the sort of 80s, then we got EDM out of that because we got these sample-based music systems that came up. So that technology instigated a whole new genre of music, and it's likely that AI techniques are going to introduce new genres. We just don't know what they are, and at the moment we're exploring the possibilities.
And by EDM, we're talking electronic dance music?
Sorry for the acronyms, yeah.
Yeah, even algo ravers have jargon. Okay, so also thinking about the questions that I've had when I've told people, oh, we're talking about AI music competition. I want to ask about the different happy mistakes and strange mistakes you saw the algorithms make that perhaps a human musician wouldn't. How did that... I mean, surely there were funny moments where you're all laughing about what come out of... Some
of the lyrics that came out were absolutely bonkers. Like, you wouldn't understand what is it even talking about. I don't know. But that kind of, puts you in a place where the AI is not you feel they're not superior to you.
Imperfect.
It's imperfect. There's something imperfect going on. It's not, so you don't get scared by it in a way. It helps you not feel, like it's going to take over, or, Skynet's going to take over. So we like to put a little bit of that bonkers stuff into the end creative product to help make that point as well. So
the lyrics were interesting as well because there was a lot of doubling up that was occurring. And I think you said that was initially based on sort of a failed sort of code. Where it was sort of, the repetition was intense. And so we actually took that and made it sort of a part of the artistry. So there's a lot of deliberate doubling up of the words, the chorus, welcome home, oh, welcome home, welcome home, welcome home, welcome home. You know, and we've all heard music tracks that have a lot of repetition, but I guess we found that it became, if you embraced that, it became a part of the character of the emotional sentiment of the song, and that was fun and weird and exciting, and probably not based on anything overly contrived. It was sort of part of that happy accident.
And quite often as humans, we're enjoying a song, or we're feeling sad, or whatever it is the song's bringing out, and then we read the lyrics and go, oh gosh, is that what that's about? That is interesting. So clearly lyrics aren't the only thing that translates meaning to people.
No, it's definitely whatever's, you know, embodied in the melody and the turn of phrase and the, I guess, the syllables. You know, you can, to your point, you can hear a song from another room and still feel a certain way before you identify its kind of molecular parts, you know.
Yeah. Well, I've got some great questions coming in here from the audience. One I wanted to ask was, why is the term AI used in this context? Aren't the algorithms just a synthesizer fed with data like you'd press a key on a piano as an input? Throw it out to the three of you.
Andrew,
You go.
You start.
I think artificial intelligence is a term that is applied to many machine learning techniques. And because we used machine learning techniques in the production of this music and the components of the music, then you can legitimately say that we've used AI to make this music. Wouldn't you say, Andrew?
Yeah, I think your phrasing of it is the right way. They've used AI to create this music rather than to say AI has created this music.
Yes.
In the same way that you might have used a piano to create this music, you know, or a recording studio to create this music.
Yeah. A disclaimer, the AI was not sentient. It did not understand that it was writing music. It did not understand the lyrics it was writing. But when it did it, it allowed us to get a feeling of understanding.
And it didn't understand when we congratulated by pouring champagne into the mainframe, and such that it could never write another song again.
I think the other thing, though, with that question, I think it is a bit more, has more agency. The AI techniques have more agency than I think the questioner seems to imply. It's not really just like pressing a button. It is certainly beyond that. You know, because it is making a contribution, it does have some agency in the process of actually unfolding that music, much more than, say, a guitar might, you know, because it's doing more active activities, but it's just not yet at the stage of taking over and completing the song by itself.
Yeah, and I suppose, with a key, you've got one input, one output, and obviously there are many different things you can program into a keyboard. With this, it was presenting you with many options and permutations. Yeah,
and in fact, you can't actually see what those options and permutations are because they're inside the neural net, which you can't exactly glimpse inside and see what's actually going on there. So what comes out the other side is always a surprise, hopefully, and interesting.
So the next question I want to segue to is, how close are we to a world where AI can also select the most promising lyrics, not just generate lyrics? So I'm thinking maybe you can be like, make me something that will be a hit in New Zealand.
Well, so I'll comment on that. There's an academic field called computational creativity, which is looking at this thing. And this question goes to the point of how can an automated system, a computational system, recognise or make an evaluation of the work. And in the way in which it was used for what we've just seen from Uncanny Valley is mainly as a generative tool. And it can be used to generate stuff, but the other side of it is it can also be used to evaluate. And often in machine learning systems, we do see that evaluation or recognition systems, so things like facial recognition, these kinds of applications of AI are more along the side of recognition. And I think if we're going to take the next step beyond what we've seen today in music and AI, we'll probably want to combine both those things, both the generation and the evaluation of things which are generated. And when those two things come into play, we'll probably take further advances.
Yeah, and that goes to this other question I've got here. What is an example for augmented music that goes beyond what humans could have done? For example, are there signs of AI-generated music that expresses feelings that so far are not available? And I suppose you had human input to that algorithm of things that already exist.
Yeah, look, it's an interesting question. I'm going to double back to the previous question at the same time and say that there's a Brisbane-based company called Popgun that were previously known as We Are Hunted, and far be it for me to speak on their behalf, but I understood that they were working in an area where they were using sentiment analysis to track how relevant a song might be at a certain point in time. What's exciting about that is that I guess you look at the A&R process, the artist and repertoire process of any record label. That's what they're doing. They're out, traditionally at the clubs and bars listening to artists and trying to feel what is the zeitgeist of the music industry or the forthcoming fad, simply so that they can, help artists sell albums, do whatever they've done traditionally. So I guess it's a high-level concept to think about what you said then, which is sort of the emotional side. But you could say that if the world needs an upbeat song right now, and that's something that can be determined through sentiment analysis and observing social media activity, etc., then that might drive a label to say, listen, we've really got to take the world, and give them something to smile about right now. And I think that's could be a fantastic outcome of that sort of, I guess, learning.
Yeah, someone else is asking about genre. Is there potential for entirely new genres to be born as a result of using these algorithm-augmented songwriting techniques? I mean, you could argue that EDM, electronic dance music, is already a genre that's come from a technological advance, but it wouldn't have to be dance music even if it was electronic. And also, I suppose I wanted to tag off that, will it always be kind of EDM, or are you
not necessarily. There's been a very new technique that's arrived over the last half a year or so called AI Jukebox, which is really interesting. It allows, it's basically a huge neural net trained on, I think, 1.6 million songs, audio of 1.6 million songs. And from listening to those songs of every genre and every artist, it learns how music works without you telling it. And it is able to take an input of an audio file, part of a song, like a chorus of a song, and then you can actually specify which variations of the neural net you want activated when you send it through. And you can continue a song in a style of any artist, in the style of any genre, and it starts coming up with some pretty strange stuff, like interesting stuff though as well. I liken it to the process of perhaps entering a dusty old record store and heading out the back and flipping through vinyl and finding something amazing you've never heard of before, and then inserting that into a production, like taking it out of context and creating something new from that. It's like a found sound sort of thing.
On a recent project, we continued John Farnham's "You're the Voice" in the style of Tame Impala.
Just to see what would happen.
Think about that for a second.
But yeah, I think the style of using those AI outputs in particular as samples, as found sound, as things from another realm, another headspace, and then inserting them into music definitely creates new genres, new exciting musical genres, which is very interesting.
I can imagine too, even in the short term, that this kind of quirkiness of the outcomes from the AI algorithms which we've seen featured in this work could in itself become a kind of a subgenre, just this kind of quirky, crazy music with AI-generated stupidity kind of as part of it. It would kind of have this sort of niche market, kind of like chiptunes do, It's kind of this sort of small kind of thing. I could see that happening. Yeah. Maybe we should start that now. Maybe.
There is like almost a genre of online comedy and memes that is, poorly translated signs. And it's a human translation of something else human, but, it hasn't quite translated right, but everyone gets a giggle out of it, and some people even have T-shirts on it. And I think AI can do the same sort of thing and tap into that sense of humour in some ways.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, I guess the advent of TikTok is so interesting because, you know, here are artists pouring their hearts out on albums and sort of, you know, 3-4 minute pieces, and it's getting translated into a mashed up 15-second kind of crazy weird thing that no one could really explain. Having seen, you know, legal contracts in record deals, I mean, they certainly didn't know that was coming. And, you know, they do have a broad statement about sort of, you know, in media now known or unknown, you know, like to compensate for the fact that the music is a copyright entity that can be used. But no, it's definitely interesting, and you know, far be it for any generation to say what the next generation is actually going to appreciate, or in the way in which they appreciate it.
Yeah.
I can tell you, it's going to be rad.
It's going to be rad, and I'm sure rad will be a word still around. It's going to be grouse. What types of music are less receptive, someone wants to know, to augmented music? For example, how difficult would it be to generate a Beethoven-like symphony?
Well, I think interestingly, genres like classical music, like Beethoven's, for example, are so well studied over hundreds of years that their structure and organisation is reasonably well understood. So it's possibly more likely that we'll get a system to do that, because we've had algorithmic processes prior to machine learning which have been able to produce works in those genres because they're so well studied and understood. It's probably much harder task to look at something where emotion is a big part of what's going on rather than structure, and to try and do that, because machine learning can learn structure. I think it's much more difficult probably for it to learn emotion.
What about jazz?
Jazz is hard, but classical music, I was going to say, getting back to classical music. Look,
jazz.
We'll talk about jazz in a sec.
Just saying it.
It's also about the performance of the classical music that it makes it more convincing. I mean, there are algorithmic processors now and AI processors that can write a full orchestral piece of music. And when you get a human orchestra to play that piece of music, it's pretty much indistinguishable from, you know, another piece of music that might have been composed by a real composer. So, you know, the sound recording and the actual human interpretation of those compositions plays a big part in whether it's going to be acceptable as a listening experience as well.
We did a little test at a speech in Sydney with two pieces of, well, one was Bark and one was Digibark, having been created by artificial intelligence, and sadly the audience got it wrong, and they
thought it was jazz.
They picked the wrong one as being Bark, basically.
Oh, wow. And I was just thinking, you know, when you come to a human with an instrument, there's that physical element of, you know, only having so many strings and fingers and things like that. But if you were a musician, I suppose you could unlock other ways to use your instrument that you haven't already been able to, because the computer could generate ways to move between chords and things like that that perhaps your handspan can't do, and all sorts of things. I don't know. Just
yeah, I think you're starting to hear some of that even in the piece we heard just today. Some of those vocal phrases are very kind of unhuman.
Completely unsingable. Yeah. You could not.
That's right. And there's been precedence to this as well, as in the MIDI, which is the Musical Instrument Digital Interface Protocol. There's a practice called black MIDI. It's called black MIDI because when you see the data, it's just constantly full of stuff. So there's these piano pieces that are done, which are called black MIDI piano pieces, and they play like 30 notes at a time, which you can't do because you've only got 10 fingers, and you know, that sort of thing.
Can you find those on the dark web?
I think you possibly can.
Yeah, right.
Look hard.
So now we get to the question that someone's posing, which is about pushing new boundaries. They wanted to ask you, Andrew, when it comes to AI playing an increasingly active role in making art, is there a danger of pushing too far?
I'm not sure is the answer to that question. It's not quite like having AI in the military, where if it goes too far, we might die. So I think maybe it's not quite that dangerous. Possibly people would be concerned about the loss of musician and artist jobs as a result if all of this stuff becomes entirely automated. The question, I guess, then is whether or not those jobs shift to being AI makers rather than, you know, piano players. Hard to know, but I don't think it's ever likely to get to that point personally. I think we will get a lot more AI in music making, but the history seems to tell us that genres continue to exist and practices continue to exist. There's a whole bunch of digital drawing tools at the moment, but people still use pencils and charcoal. Maybe not to the extent they did before. Maybe that's how it goes. The pie of creativity gets broken up into different proportions, and there's less of the traditional proportions and newer ones open up. That's, I think, how I see it anyway.
Yeah, and I suppose the other thing we need to remember, and if you're around for this afternoon's panel on AI and human narratives, we'll definitely dive deeper into this, but there's also thinking about what's going into your algorithm, who's represented in that, and who's not represented in that. And when we come to music and voices and who has ownership of these things, that's an ethical issue, I suppose, you need to be aware of now when it's emerging, so that you can make sure that it continues in a positive direction that is inclusive, as opposed to pushing people out who are marginalised already because they're less represented in what's being used.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, and to Andrew's point as well, that, you know, it might not be a musical pitfall as such, a creative pitfall. It's an ethical pitfall, a bias pitfall, revenue pitfall for artists, perhaps not being able to connect to the new construct of revenue for artists. And so, yes, I think that something was interesting when we did the Google tools was that one of the first things that the lyric generator had been trained on was hip-hop lyrics. And sadly, you know, of course, there was a lot of sort of male concepts in that, because it's of the history of, I guess, you know, male hip hop artists, and not particularly pleasant concepts either in terms of a lot of the lyrical topics. So I think, you know, it's not to say you cannot go down that creative path, but you need to know what, you know, how it's been trained and have intentional outcomes rather than unintentional.
And certainly that's why we're having these discussions today, because I think if we bring the community into this discussion and into this industry and bring them into not just being consumers of the end product, but being there to talk about and what goes into algorithms, what decisions get made and how they get made, then hopefully we can help to everyone to see themselves in what's being created. Someone here is asking, will we see the emergence of artificial art? I think that you should come along to this afternoon's panel, where we will be talking about AI and street art and going beyond that into art. So that's a very good question I will save for that panel. Someone says, this is great stuff. Thank you for beginning with a compliment. Love that up here. Wonder if we are also at a stage where sentiment analysis is already part of music creation. What do we mean by sentiment analysis?
I'm apparently the sentiment guy. I think it's to the point of what I mentioned before about actually, well, there are two versions, broadly speaking, I guess. One would be going into the nature of lyrics and sort of saying, well, when we did Beautiful the World, you know, we quite transparently curated the overall sentiment of the song. You know, what people took away was hopefully a sense of hope and change. But can computers do that? Look, maybe that's one for you, Andrew. I mean, I guess there are obviously attempts being made to do it, but how are they going?
Well, so there's a lot of sentiment analysis for text, so on Twitter feeds and things like that, and looking for those sorts of things. There are some attempts at doing that for sound, for music, and there are some principles you can apply, you know, harshness of texture, speed, those sorts of things, which will give you a feeling. We're, of course, already living that, because services like Spotify use these kinds of principles to curate a playlist for you. So when you start a process, then the next song and the next song after that are ones which are seen by their processes to be similar to the one that you originally chose, and so
why do I always end up with sort of obscure banjo playing or something on there?
Right, that says more about you, I think, than Spotify.
Yeah, so if you're already, you know, whether it's on a streaming platform, you're already watching, you know, comedies or shows that have a certain sentiment, or you're you're having a bit of a melancholy evening and listening to lots of sad songs, it will, you know, just suggest more that you might like to cry to. But that kind of is an example of the way that they're already kind of...
Do you want to complement or alleviate your emotional state?
Yeah, exactly. There's so many great questions. Firstly, thank you so much to everyone, whether you're online or in the room, asking these questions. It's great to see everyone so engaged with this. One question also about how soon you think you'll see, or would you like to see, these types of artificial intelligence creating film scores and soundtracks. That's a bit of a difficult one, isn't it? Because you've got the audio visual and the sentiment of the script, and then you've got the music underneath and the editing.
It could be argued that film, like music, is a very large universe, but a very enclosed universe. So if there was some way of doing sentiment analysis of vision, which I believe there has been research into, and people are starting to do this now. It requires enormous amounts of processing power. That's the thing. If you're trying to, I mean, you know, Google's figured out how to tell the difference between a dog and a hat, but moving imagery is a lot harder and a lot requires much more power. But you know, some systems are now evolving. We'll be able to do that sort of stuff. If you could somehow map the machine learning output of what it sees on the screen and do a sentiment analysis of that, and then map that to some kind of algorithmic musical process, then I think you've got the beginnings of music being written automatically for film scores.
I mean, the product Exhale, which was using sort of story arc mapping to attempt to sort of take a longer form piece of music and have it sort of morph in relation to the story arc.
I would argue that the dimensions involved in analysing a piece of film or moving imagery would be exponential in terms of the dimensions required to analyse a piece of music, which are already huge.
Yeah.
So it's a big task.
Yeah, and I suppose at this stage it seems like it's more a phase of experimenting and working in collaborations like with the team you have to see what's possible and what's tricky and what happens, as opposed to it being a fast track for anything, because having AI do some of these things would definitely take much longer than having a music producer.
Well, I'm just saying you could use the neural nets inside your head to do it as well.
Yeah, yeah.
And then probably get a pretty good result.
Yeah, and I mean, I've seen amazing robots at QUT here in Brisbane that are harvesting capsicums and going along and looking at them being, is that a red capsicum? Or is that a green? That one's red enough. Okay. And then picking it. So that's just, you know, and it's on a green background of leaves and everything. So that's a very simple visual cue. So given their success in that, you can imagine, and how long it took to get there, you can imagine how long it's going to take.
I've got a new genre of music for you. Capsicum music.
Oh.
Capsicum jazz.
The name of the robot is Harvey the Harvester, so maybe it can be his inner monologue.
One thing I just wanted to say with that, and because we're working quite constantly with commercial projects, is just because you can use AI doesn't mean you should or have to. So I think, you know, as we can see with certain processes that have become ubiquitous, it's because it's helpful and they can scale and do something that humans genuinely perhaps don't want to do. So to your point, yes, I guess navigating that in creativity is what it's about, and not everything is going to be, you know, it's not going to be helpful to use AI for everything. We're not going to want to use AI for everything, and some of it won't scale. And I guess that's just part of the current journey that we're on.
I think too the state at the moment is that the companies that are out there doing this kind of automatically generated music, some of them are using AI, some are using traditional algorithms for doing that, but they're doing the kind of pragmatic work. Like you've got a 2-minute clip that you've made for your business and you just need some stock music, but the AI in those is not doing any of the sentiment activities. It's just you say, I want a very upbeat piece within these parameters, within this time, and it's doing all the pragmatic kind of arranging kind of stuff and making sure it fits exactly within the time scale and so forth that you've got. That's where we're currently at.
Yeah, and I mean, someone else actually is obviously, you've got some Uncanny Valley fans in the audience who say they attended one of your events at Recital Hall, where the audience had to vote on the composition by Beethoven or AI, and many failed. Yeah, they were. Obviously, you've talked about that Bach and DigiBark. Would you like to talk a bit more about that project for anyone who's wondering?
Well, I guess it's the Turing test, isn't it? Which is?
The Turing test of music, which is, can you understand that or believe that a piece of music is written by a human, or
when it wasn't?
If it passes that test, then it has passed the musical Turing test. The Bach that we got the AI to write had analysed the complete works of Bach. Have been trained on the complete works of Bach, and Bach by definition is very mathematical construction of music anyway. But the thing that Bach does better than an AI is he, having made the rules, knows when to break the rules. And an AI or machine learning is very good at learning the rules without you telling him what the rules are, but it's not so great at learning to break the rules that it discovers when it learns what those rules are. So that's kind of where the discrepancy lies at the moment.
Yeah.
So you go, Andrew.
I was going to say the previous tests, very similar to this, done in the past, have shown exactly the same result. That whenever algorithmically generated music based on something, an audience member, naive, almost always chooses the algorithmically generated one. It's because it's more Bach than Bach, as Justin was saying. It's more Mozart than Mozart. It's taking every single cliche and packing them all into the one piece, which those composers would never do because they'd be too embarrassed to do that.
So the audience is like subconsciously picking up on those conscious decisions by Bach to break his own rules or the conventions of composing at the time, and they're going, oh, is that the computer making a mistake? Oh, maybe it is.
When the computer actually does make a mistake, that's when the magic starts to happen, and that's why we sometimes leave some of the mistakes in to the AI stuff that comes out, because it's often the most interesting stuff.
Yeah, and I think definitely the lyrics that you went through, the different sounds that it came out with, it's even though you put in this set of rules, you can't always imagine or presuppose what they're going to come out with in those rules, because they may not know that what they've hit on is a loophole, and you're like, you're right, that does follow the rules, but that's quite unexpected.
I was just going to quickly say that, if as humans we appreciate something, then we don't have much control over that. You listen to something, you either like it, you don't like it. I've got a great friend who's a singer-songwriter, real purist musician. He didn't like dance music when it came along in the 90s, and he still doesn't. I guess the next generation or young generations are much better at actually, assessing change or accepting change and hearing new music, or deliberately going out to find something that breaks the mold of the previous generation. It's not ageist. Anyone can do that, but I guess, younger people often have ears and eyes open to that sort of change. But if you like something, you don't necessarily need to dive in and know exactly where it came from. I don't think we always do that, Music boffins do. They want the lyrics, they want the origin, they want who played bass on it, what record label did it, what studio it was recorded in. But not everyone does that, And even with our work with MIMU, the music generator, the first thing is to find out whether people actually like it or not,
Yeah, and I mean, perhaps it tells us something about ourselves and our own pretentious views of our own taste if we like something and then we feel a bit embarrassed if we find out that we like the artificially made one.
Absolutely, it becomes a guilty pleasure.
Yeah. Well, I think we've got time for one more question before we wrap this up. So one last question from the audience is about deep fakes and whether AI is used to pretend a song is by an artist but isn't. Do you think that could be a problem, or do you think that's something Yeah.
If it's entertaining, I don't think it's a problem at all. I mean, if you like it.
Oh, the lawyer will say otherwise.
Depends what you do with that music, I think.
It's a problem, I suppose, if you're making money off your music.
True.
And you're...
There's also the moral rights issue. I mean, if you might not want if you're an artist, you might not want someone imitating your voice, putting your voice on a piece of music, making your voice say something you didn't say, which is perfectly possible with media synthesis now. You're starting to see it. I mean, that whole song we pointed out was it's entirely sung by Eminem. It sounds like Eminem. And he's not singing Eminem's lyrics, of course, but it's his likeness. And it could be mistaken for him.
But in a world where artists are struggling to survive and find revenue streams, I mean, if you can package your artist's avatar into another form of creativity and revenue stream, why wouldn't you? If I can continue to write Bowie songs for David Bowie, even though he's gone, legal problems aside, maybe that's something that will be sort of the legacy of an artist, that they leave behind their avatar so that other people can continue to enjoy the legacy of their art forever.
And we have seen dead rappers in, a hologram at a huge music festival, and that raises lots of excitement, ethical problems, moral issues, and I suppose maybe this is something we need to write in our will now. I do not consent to being on stage
living inside a computer for the rest of eternity.
Folk Festival as a hologram, but I will consent to be raving in the audience as a hologram.
Yeah, I mean, these are real questions because it's technically possible to do all these things, so they're really just ethical questions. And there's contradiction here because, as Van Gogh said, great artists steal. And there's been a lot of genres of music and other art forms that have taken from things, collage of various sorts and remixes. The music industry, of course, has been through this before with sampling, and that took decades to really sort through and sort out all the pros and cons, the legal rights, protocols for doing it in the right way. And I imagine that it'll take us decades to work through the implications.
It'd be good to see it coming this time, Andrew.
Well, eyes wide open, right?
Thank you so much to our audience for all your questions, and could you please join me in thanking our panel for their answers?